I've mentioned the autonomic nervous system a few times. We know that autonomic means that this is the part of the nervous system that controls things we cannot control consciously. So it functions autonomously without our conscious control. So in the body, what would this involve, do you think? What that we've already talked about is controlled without our, conscious control? Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and secretion of glands, right? That is what these neurons control. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and secretion of glands. So we have two different divisions for the autonomic nervous system. They do the opposite of each other. They have the opposite effect on their target organ, and they work together, okay? So the two divisions are called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Okay, sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is going to be really important for you guys for physiology. You'll talk a lot about the autonomic nervous system because this is really what has to do with homeostasis, okay? Okay, so let's talk first about the effects of these two divisions. Okay, so first of all, I think that the best thing to do is to memorize that this is the nickname, kind of, for the sympathetic division. It's called our fight or flight response. I think the best thing to do is to memorize that fight or flight is sympathetic. That way you do not get these mixed up, because people do get them mixed up. So you want to know that the sympathetic division is our fight or flight division. If you remember that, then you can figure all of this out, or most of it, because we've all had this kind of response, right? I think every time we have a test, right? Or you are doing whatever it is that you feel nervous about doing, whether it's, public speaking or, gosh, there's a million things, right, in our lives that make us nervous. So we've all had this reaction. So you know that your heart starts beating faster, you usually have an increase in blood pressure, respiratory rate might increase. Usually there's increased activity of sweat glands. That's why we sometimes get the sweaty palms when we're nervous. Sometimes we get that butterfly feeling in the stomach, because this is the part of the nervous system that's really designed to protect us or help us protect ourselves if we are threatened. So this will kick in, whenever we feel nervous, but it's really designed to allow us to run away from something that might be threatening us or fight for our lives, right? That's why it's called fight or flight. So this is designed for survival if we are threatened. And blood flow will go toward our skeletal muscles, right, to prepare us to run away or fight, whatever we have to do to save our lives. So digestion is really not something that's going to be important at this time. The body will give priority to, what's going to keep us alive in a fight or flight situation. So these reflexes are also inhibited. Now, sometimes people do lose bladder and bowel control when they're in a really stressful, like they're suddenly have some kind of shock to their system from whatever it might be. They sometimes lose bladder and bowel control, but that is not an effect of these neurons. That's thought to be just kind of the whole nervous system is suddenly kind of stimulated by whatever is happening, and so that, sometimes those sphincter muscles will relax. But these neurons, the sympathetic neurons, actually cause the sphincter muscles to contract. Why? Because if someone is chasing you, do you have to, you want to take time to go to the bathroom? No, really, it's not important at that time, right? So we're going to give priority to things that are important at that time.
BP, what is BP?
Blood pressure. Yeah, blood pressure. So heart rate, blood pressure, respiration all increase. Also, this division will dilate the pupils to make sure we have, we're able to see in the dark, which is a time where we're most threatened. Okay, the parasympathetic division is the opposite. This is what's hopefully in control most of the time, right? Hopefully we're not in a fight or flight situation most of the time. So this is the division that's really important for maintaining homeostasis. It is nicknamed Rest and Digest. So again, I think if you memorize this one thing, know that this is parasympathetic. You can figure all this other stuff out. Notice this is really the opposite of what the sympathetic does. Okay, so it lowers the heart rate, lowers the respiratory rate, lowers the blood pressure, constricts the pupil, will stimulate digestion. That's why it's nicknamed Rest and Digest. Stimulates the digestive processes, stimulates the defecation and urination reflexes. So it's pretty much the opposite of everything that happens in our fight or flight mode. Okay, so memorize. This is sympathetic, and Rest and Digest is parasympathetic. Okay, I will ask you about these effects on the written exam.
In a survival situation, when your pupils dilate, what does that do?
It allows more light in, so I think the reason is that we are most threatened in the dark. So it helps to ensure that we're seeing as well as we possibly could in the dark. You know, when you're in the dark, if you've ever noticed, you know, you'll actually do this, I think, when you take physiology during a lab exercise. You know, when you shine a light in someone's eyes, their pupils constrict. So light will cause the pupil to constrict, which is protective, you know, for the eye. It will control the amount of light that's entering. In the dark, our pupils dilate to allow more light in. It also can make vision a little bit blurry though. If your pupils dilate quite a bit, then it actually can be harder to focus on near objects. So the dilation, or I'm sorry, far objects. So the part of, you know, what happens when the pupils dilate is that it can, although it lets more light in and allows us to see better in the dark, it can make certain, depending on, you know, the distance, how far away we're trying to see, it can make the image a little bit blurry. Okay, so this is kind of just, you know, FYI, shows the difference between a motor neuron going out to our skeletal muscle. Remember, a long time ago on the first day we started talking about the nervous system, we used the terms somatic and visceral or autonomic. So if you guys remember, I said that the motor neurons that we have already been talking about are actually our somatic motor neurons. They go out to our skeletal muscles. Okay, so this is not, they did not do this very well in this diagram. This cell body is really supposed to be here in the anterior horn of the gray matter. And notice that the axon is traveling on the anterior root of the spinal nerve. We said the anterior root is motor, right? Okay, so now notice here, the only difference is that instead of looking at a neuron going to our skeletal muscle, it's going to go out to smooth muscle in one of our organs. So this is going to be an autonomic neuron. The cell body is actually here in the lateral horn. So remember we said last time, we were talking about the gray matter of the spinal cord, we said the posterior horn is sensory, the lateral horn, where this one is for autonomic neurons, and then the anterior horn is for our somatic motor neurons, okay? So this is in the lateral horn. So the lateral horn is only for the autonomic neuron cell bodies, and because these are all motor neurons, they're all going out to either smooth muscle or cardiac muscle or glands, this will still travel out on the anterior root of the spinal nerve. Okay, but it is an autonomic neuron, and it's going to go out to an organ, okay? So they have their cell bodies in the lateral horn, is the point I was trying to make. Okay, so this is just a table that kind of compares some fascinating facts about motor neurons, like our somatic motor neurons and our autonomic. And I'll tell you what I want you to know, but I just wanted to point out there's a table that kind of, for quick reference here. Okay, so whether we're talking about the sympathetic or the parasympathetic division, it's actually the pathway of their neurons is very simple. This is gonna be a 2-neuron pathway, going all the way from the central nervous system out to the organ, okay? Just 2 neurons. So we know that these 2 neurons have to synapse somewhere, and you guys know a ganglion is a collection of neuron cell bodies, right? So they're going to synapse somewhere in a ganglion. So this first neuron in the pathway will have its cell body somewhere in the central nervous system. Okay, so they're using the spinal cord here as the example. Actually, most of these do have their cell bodies in the spinal cord. Notice this is in the lateral horn, okay? But some of these will actually have their cell bodies in the brainstem and will travel with 4 cranial nerves, okay? So we'll come back to that. So this first neuron is called the preganglionic neuron, okay? Preganglionic because it's before the ganglion. Okay? So remember when we talked about synapses before, we said that the first neuron is called the presynaptic, the second one is the postsynaptic. So this is basically the same thing, except this is called preganglionic. And that second neuron that goes from the ganglion to the organ, that will be called the postganglionic neuron. Okay, and it is just that simple. So what I'd like you to know for these 2 divisions is I'd like you to know where they have their cell bodies, okay? Where the preganglionic neurons have their cell bodies, and where the ganglia are located. And that's it. Okay, so let's take a break. Let's come back at 8:40. We'll talk about that, and then we will be done. Okay?